I didn't realize how hard it would be to talk about like what a book is about when I read it a month ago. I guess I should introduce myself. All right, hello. Thank you so much for coming back and watching this video. I realized I didn't introduce myself in my first one, so my name's Rachel. Hi. And this video is just gonna be all of the books that I read in August. So the first book that I read was Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. I picked this up because I really wanted to try Rebecca Roanhorse before her new book comes out, Black Sun, and I really liked it. It's a book following a character named Maggie in this post-apocalyptic setting. Big event happened that drowned out pretty much all of the world except for the area that she's living in. It's a Native American owned voices story as well, which I really enjoyed because I don't think that I've really read from many Native American authors. It's just something that I'm trying to actively change. The thing that I liked the most about this book was Maggie herself. The story really goes through a big arc, and I think that at the heart of the story, it's about trauma and her trauma surrounding the relationships she had with this like godlike immortal creature. Monsters and gods are all back and they're real and they exist, like they coexist with humans, and it created this really interesting dynamic. There were a lot of really cool scenes with all of the monsters and the gods too, and it was told in a really believable way almost. The only thing that I didn't really like about this book was that the plot kind of scatters about and it was kind of hard to follow in certain places. I read this about a month ago, so I'm not remembering everything about the story, but I remember really falling in love with Maggie as a character. She's very hurt and she's very angry, and she like has a lot of issues that she's working through, but I just found her to be so realistic. She's a character that I really enjoyed reading about. The other character in the book, whose name is Kai, was also really enjoyable. He's a medicine man, or training to be a medicine man, and he was kind of like a foil to her. He's very charming, very sweet. Their relationship was very interesting. I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5. I liked a lot of aspects of it. I just wish that the plot had been tighter. All right, so the next book that I read was actually an audiobook called The Deep by Nick Cutter. I know that Nick Cutter's book, The Troop, is really popular on YouTube right now. It's been passed around a lot. It has a lot of like talk surrounding it because it's horrific, really horrific and disgusting. So I wanted to pick up The Deep because I loved The Troop. I've read it twice now and I'm probably gonna reread it. The Deep was also really good, and it had all of Nick Cutter's elements to it that I really enjoyed, but the ending really lost me. I just realized I didn't talk about what this book actually is about. The plot of The Deep is basically there's this virus that has infected humans that is making them forget everything. Basically, the main character in The Deep, his brother, is this super famous, like incredibly smart scientist who's trying to cure the Gets, and in order to cure it, he's deep down in the Mariana Trench, where they've found this molecule of some sort, this organism that they think might be a major scientific breakthrough that could help them understand the Gets and possibly cure it. This book is very classic Nick Cutter. It's disturbing. There's a lot of body horror in it, a lot of like very graphic descriptions of disgusting things. His books are some of the first that I've read where he actually doesn't shy away from describing these things. There's a point in it where he's describing the death of an animal that was so graphic and horrible that I like actually teared up a little bit. It was very gross. But like I said, the ending really lost me. I don't think that the ending lived up to the rest of the story. I thought the ending was really like cheap almost. It kind of like, I was listening to it and I was like, really? Like this is where you're going with this story? So it didn't live up to The Troop in my mind, but Nick Cutter is an author that I want to read more from and I want to read more of. If you haven't read Nick Cutter and you're really looking for gross, disgusting, and horrific, I can't recommend him enough. And I ended up giving The Deep 3 out of 5 stars. The next physical read that I picked up was Forest of Souls by Lori M. Lee. And I was actually really anticipating this book. I pre-ordered it even, probably because of how pretty the cover is. Like, I love this cover so much. This really caught my eye though, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna read this and I'm gonna love it. But I didn't actually love it. So, Force of Souls follows a character named Saoirse who has a very classic YA protagonist feel to her, I think. She is an orphan who comes from nothing, who joins the military, and she slowly is becoming like the best that she can be. She's training under the Queen's shadow. This story progresses as Saoirse discovers that she's a shaman, and in this world, in her country anyway, shamans are treated horribly. They're put in jail. It's an elemental-based magic shaman, so she is a shaman of light. They can be soul guides and bring people back to life, which she ends up doing with her best friend. The thing about this book that I really didn't enjoy was that it was a lot of talking about who Saoirse is and what she can do, and a lot less about showing. The thing that I did enjoy about this book is that it is a fantasy YA book that doesn't have any romance in it, and the forefront relationship is a female-female friendship. And I think that a lot of YA fantasies could do better with that, could focus more on friendship rather than romance, because it's an underrepresented relationship. But Saoirse and her best friend Sango, you can tell they have a really strong connection and that they love each other and they're friends, but you don't get a lot of emotionally impactful scenes with them. There's not a lot of scenes with them that move the story forward. It's just a lot of them reminiscing on how they're friends, how they became friends, what they used to be like before Saoirse brought her back to life and irrevocably changed Sango's entire future. Then Saoirse is also this like really, really good soldier. Like she's just really strong. She's really good at fighting. No one can beat her in a sword fight. And she's training under this like spy master, but we don't see any of her training, and we also don't see any of the missions she's been sent on. They're just like referenced. But if it's just referenced, it doesn't feel authentic. Like Saoirse never really felt authentic to me in her training or how great she was. The world building felt really shallow. Elemental magic, which is essentially what this is, all the shamans can control a certain element like fire, water, earth, etc. It's something that's been done before, so it didn't bring anything new, and I didn't feel like I was reading anything fresh and exciting. In the end, I gave this 2 stars just because I didn't even finish it actually. I skimmed the last 100 pages because I just got so bored with it, and I was just really disappointed because I was really looking forward to this one, but it just let me down. All right, so the next book that I picked up is Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. I got the first 3 books of this in kind of like a bundle deal on Amazon. I had heard about this, the Expanse series. It's a huge sci-fi space opera that spans like 9 novels. So I picked it up kind of on a whim. I don't usually buy whole series at a time or even series like in bundles because I want to read the first book and figure out if I'm gonna like the rest of the series. I took my chance with this and I'm actually really, really happy that I did. This is a story that's kind of hard to summarize and explain because it is covering 9 books. So this first book is just one part. To give this a nice, quaint little summary, it's basically about an infectious protomolecule that starts turning humans into zombies. It's James Holden is our main character as well as Detective Miller, and it's set in 2 point of views, and basically it's James finding this protomolecule and then having to escape from all of the governments that are trying to track him down. And Detective Miller, kind of a down on his luck, like not great detective who's given this task of finding a very, very rich person's daughter. And their stories connect and collide in really interesting ways. The thing that I love the most about this book is that it's 500 pages, 500 plus. It's 560 pages, but I read this in 2 days because it's hard to put down. It's it's written in a very, very accessible way, especially for a hard sci-fi, especially for a space opera sci-fi. It's so expansive, expanse. It's so huge and epic, but it goes by like so quick. Like you're reading it and then you can't put it down because all of this stuff keeps happening and it doesn't stop happening. Like from page 1 and then just kept going. Like there was event after event after event and it didn't let up. So it just made it a really compulsive read. And I really, really enjoyed a lot of the characters in this too. I thought that they were fleshed out enough to really get you invested in them, but it wasn't a character-driven story. It's very driven by this mystery of the molecule that's turning humans into zombies, how it got released, why it got released, who was the one who released it. There's a lot of world building in this, obviously, because it's a sci-fi novel, so we have to understand the circumstances in the world that we're placed in, but it didn't feel info dumpy in any way. Like, it felt very put together well, and it didn't feel like I was getting all of this information just shoved into my brain all at once. And I really like James S.A. Corey's writing style. I can't wait to continue reading this. Like, I just keep thinking about this series and how badly I want to continue reading it. I gave this a 4 out of 5. The only thing that really stopped me from like really loving it is that James S.A. Corey is a man, and you can really tell sometimes when he's writing about female characters that he's a man. And the romance in this was like not interesting to me even a little bit, and I really wish it just hadn't even been in there. But it was such a minor subplot that I didn't really care, and I loved the adventure that this took me on. 4 out of 5 stars. So after having read such a big space opera, the book that I wanted to pick up as an audiobook was Tweet Cute by Emma Lord, and I don't regret it. In fact, I am so happy that I read this book. YA contemporaries usually are a very big hit or miss for me. Tweet Cute just seems to have such a perfect blend of everything, and it wraps everything up so nicely, and it was so cute. The essential plot of the story is boiled down to a boy and a girl from rival restaurants that start a Twitter war with each other, and then it just goes on from there. What I really liked about this was the in-depth look into either character's family, and they were two very different families. I just really loved all of the drama between their families and inside their families. And then Pepper and Jack, obviously they fall in love because it's a YA contemporary, but the way they do is just so sweet and so cute, and I just felt really connected to both characters. Like, I just ended up caring so much about them by the end of the story, which is hard for a contemporary to make me do. I usually just read them kind of like as book candy. Like, I just need a palate cleanser to get from one of my fantasies to the next fantasy. I ended up actually really caring about this one, and I kind of want to own it now, like as a physical copy, because I do want to reread it. It was really cute and really sweet, and I definitely recommend it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, which is high for a contemporary for me, especially a young adult contemporary. I think it just blends all of its subplots really well, and the writing was also really good. But I read that. Midnight Sun. After I enjoyed Tweet Cute so much, the next book that I read was Midnight Sun. And I have an entire video on this, so I'm not going to talk about how much I hated this book or how much it made me angry, everything. You should just go watch that video if you haven't seen it already, because this book sucked. This book sucked a lot. So Midnight Sun sucked so much, I decided to pick up a different vampire story. That would be The Beautiful by Renee Audier. I'd heard a lot about this, and it was only $8 on Amazon for a hard copy, which is pretty nice. I'm about to just start reading these descriptions because I don't know what I'm talking about. So this book is following Celine Rousseau after she has to flee from Paris to New Orleans. This dark, shady thing happened in her past that you learn in the book that I don't want to talk about because it's a spoiler. So she goes to live in a convent with other 6 girls who are also leaving their homes to live in America. And it follows Celine after being introduced to a character who gets her swept up into the underground life of New Orleans. It's a vampire story without directly saying vampires in it, and I know a lot of people really didn't like that. A lot of people had problems with the fact that the supernatural elements of this book aren't labeled almost. You know that Celine is interacting with like immortal, strange creatures. Like, they never outright say the word vampire. I think maybe they say it once. I started reading this book really hoping I was going to enjoy it. I thought, if I just used my brain power and was like, you were definitely going to enjoy this story, that I was going to enjoy it. But I really kind of didn't. There were a lot of things that I did like. I liked the idea of Celine's character, and I liked glimpses of her character, but sometimes she didn't feel fully fleshed out. I know that this is the beginning of a series, so maybe I'll feel more connected to her character once I read the second one, if there's going to be a third one maybe. But the entire time I was reading it, I just felt really disconnected from the story. I didn't feel super invested in Celine or what she was doing or what was happening with her love interest. There's kind of like a love triangle plot that I didn't entirely hate. I thought it was kind of done in a sneaky and interesting way. I liked what Midnight Sun didn't do was make its vampires scary or have any consequences, but this book is definitely on the side of like vampires are dark, mysterious creatures that you probably don't want to get involved in, and I liked that. And I also really liked the ending of this book. It was interesting enough to make me want to read the second book, but I will probably get the second book from the library instead of buying it. So I gave The Beautiful 3 out of 5 stars. It had a lot of elements that I liked, but a lot of elements that I didn't find were cohesive enough. The next audiobook that I picked up was All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. And this is a very short book, so I don't want to talk too much about it and about its plot. Plus, I think a lot of people already know most of what this book is about. So this is a series of essays that start from young childhood all the way into adulthood. He right off the bat starts with his first traumatic experience as a child being bullied, all the way through into college and after college. It's really interesting. It explores a lot of gender identity as well as like sexuality and the influence that your family has on you. It was really impactful and really powerful. I don't want to talk too much about what it's really about, just because I think that you should go into it not knowing too much, taking it in as you read it. I listened to it and I really enjoyed listening to it, but I kind of do wish that I had read it physically as well. I think that maybe I would have like absorbed more that way. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars just because sometimes it was a little repetitive. Like he would talk about his family in one part and then go on to talk about them in another part and say almost the exact same things. Story wasn't linear, like he jumped around in the timeline a lot, so I felt kind of confused sometimes on what age he was or what part he was talking about or what events had happened. Like he would talk in one part about something after someone had already passed away and then later talk about them like they were alive. So that was kind of confusing, and that's kind of why I wish I had read it like physically instead of listening to the audiobook. I think I might have been able to follow along a little bit more. I definitely recommend All Boys Aren't Blue. It's a very important read, especially for young teens who are in the queer community that are struggling. I think it could be really, really, really useful for them. And then I read Calibans War by James S.A. Corey. I already talked about Leviathan Wake, so I'm not going to go into what the plot of this one is. It's basically just following along almost directly after Leviathan Wakes ends. I loved it. I loved it even more than the first one, actually, because this has 2 characters in it that are 2 of my favorite characters now. This book follows 4 point of views in this one, and usually I'm not a multiple point of view kind of person. I don't usually like having to skip around from so many points of views, but this one did it really, really well, especially when all of the characters end up coming together. In the end, it was really satisfying. Like I said in the first one, James S.A. Corey is a man, and there are 2 female characters in this that he's writing about, and sometimes it's kind of the way he writes, but that didn't detract from how much I really loved their characters a lot. And this one I gave 5 stars just because of how much more invested I was and how much more like emotional it made me. There was a scene in it I actually remember having to put the book down and just being like, I can't believe that just happened. Like, I can't believe that just happened to this character that I care so much about. And it was just really, really good. I literally can't stop thinking about the 3rd book. Like, I want to start it now. Like, I want to start it right now. I want to begin it immediately. So I really can't praise the Expanse series enough, even though I've only read 2 books from it. The next 3 books that I picked up were all audiobooks. I read really, really long books in the month of August. Like I was just constantly reading like 400, 500, 600 page books. So I really just wanted to chill out and listen to some audiobooks and just be able to play Bubble Shooter on my computer. So the next book that I listened to was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. And I'm really glad that I finally picked this one up because I've always wanted to read by Celeste Ng. She's an author I've always been really interested in. So Little Fires Everywhere starts with the introduction of 2 different families in a town called Shaker Heights. It's pretty much the very typical white suburb that you can imagine, with the perfect green lawns, the huge houses. All of them have been power washed recently. A man's walking his dog down the street and it's probably a terrier that barks too much. So the 2 families that we have are the Warrens and the Richardsons. The Warrens comprise of Mia and Pearl, a single mother and her teenage daughter who live this like nomadic lifestyle, moving from town to town. And then the Richardsons are kind of like the very stereotypical nuclear family. You got mom, dad, 4 kids. They're pretty much just a very basic white American family. I actually really, really enjoyed this. Listening to it on audiobook was, again, maybe not the best idea. I wish I had read it instead. It's a book that I think you can probably absorb a little bit better if you're reading, but like I said, I really just needed some audiobooks to listen to. The audiobook wasn't bad, but the narrator kind of meh. The things that I really, really liked about this was the commentary that it made, especially involving the plot that you get kind of halfway through it where something happens, and it's in the description of the book, but basically a white family adopts a Chinese baby, and then the Chinese baby's mother wants the baby back. And it's really following the court case, but also following the Warrens and Richardsons' involvement in that court case. It's just a very, very interesting story that I was shook by in a lot of different ways. The way Elena, the mother in the Richardson family, gets involved and is just snooping through Mia's background, kind of putting her nose where it doesn't belong in all of this business. It was written really well and it was very interesting, but I gotta say I wasn't like super hooked on it until probably about like 30% into the book. The beginning of the book is just setting everything up and I didn't feel that connected to anyone just yet. But once the story really started going, I felt a little bit more. I didn't care about the Richardson family. I don't know if that was the purpose of the book, like you're not really supposed to care about them and you're supposed to only care about Mia and Pearl, but that's kind of how I felt. Like I just wanted to make sure that Mia and Pearl were okay by the end of the book. The ending is very, very satisfying. It wraps everything up nicely because it's not wrapped up nicely. Like there's a very tattered end to it and things are kind of left up in the air almost, but I did like that and I enjoyed the end. It felt like everyone got what they deserved and that's what I really liked. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. So after that, I picked up another audiobook, and this one I got from Libby. My library actually had it. I was surprised it was on my library app because I would have thought there'd been a really long hold for it, but there wasn't, and that's Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. This book has been getting a lot of hype, and I think it's very well deserved. It's a very, very good book. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars, actually. The description on the book is basically just talking about how Amira is a babysitter for a white family, and she takes the white child to a grocery store where a security guard then accuses her of kidnapping the child because Amira is black. There's a lot more that happens in the story that you don't know, and I don't think you should know. It's so complex and there's a lot of different things that get interwoven all together. It's actually a dual point of view novel, which is not something that I knew going into it. You're told 2 different points of views. Amira, our young, fresh out of college, kind of like struggling young woman, and then Alix, who has a stupid name, who is the mother of the white child, and she runs her own business, and she's kind of like a boss babe and kind of very typical like white American suburban woman. And it's told from their 2 points of views, and just the narrator for the audiobook was fantastic in that regard. This is probably one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. I can't recommend the audiobook enough. Like whereas with Little Fires Everywhere, I wish I had read it physically, with Such a Fun Age, I almost want to buy the like audiobook version of this because it was that good. The 2 points of views, you can really tell whose like point of view it is. Like when you're listening to Amira's versus when you're listening to Alix's, they're so different in the tone and inflection and how the narrator speaks. It's phenomenal. She also does dialogue amazingly, which is also Kylie Reed. Kylie Reed writes really, really good dialogue. It's very believable. It's not written in any kind of strange, stilted way, but it also doesn't feel too much like trying to make this sound like a believable conversation between friends. It does. It sounds very believable in everything that Amira is talking about and Alix is talking about with her friends. I would say that this story is a commentary on performative allyship, very much so at its core. It's just phenomenal. I almost can't string words together about this book because I loved it so, so much. I think I finished the audiobook in the span of like 1 day. I listen to my audiobooks on 2 times speed, so it's not too hard to do that, but it's the fact that I didn't lose interest at any points, and every time I like went to do something else, I was like, I just kind of want to listen to this audiobook right now. And as soon as I put it down, I texted my friend and was like, you have to read this book. 5 out of 5 stars for Such a Fun Age, probably one of the best books that I've read in 2020 so far. So while I had checked out Such a Fun Age on my library app, I noticed that they had a section just dedicated to supporting Black authors, and I thought that was amazing. So I decided to pick up another book that I saw in that section, and that's Ghost Boys by Jewel Parker Rhodes. This is a very short book too. It's actually a middle grade novel. This book, however, is a very serious story and a very poignant one. It follows a 12-year-old boy named Jerome who is shot and killed by a police officer, and then it follows him as he becomes a ghost and watches over his family and the ramifications of his death. It follows him as he comes to terms with his death and police brutality and what that means, and why he, as a 12-year-old boy, was targeted and shot by a police officer. It follows the court case a little bit too, and it also brings a ghost character, the ghost character of Emmett Till, into it as well. And if you're not familiar with Emmett Till, he was a young boy who was killed down south after speaking to a white woman. It's a very, very powerful story and a very, very sad one. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked it. It was quick and easy to listen to. It's a middle grade, so it's toned down a lot in the brutality aspects, but it also is very honest and open about it. The things that I really enjoyed about it was watching Jerome go through the stages of his own grief and coming to terms with his own death. And then it's obviously a commentary on police brutality. It's very relevant to all the things that are happening in today's society as well. I do think it's something that if you have a chance to pick up and listen to, you should. I found Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong in my laundry room. So I picked it up because I had heard a lot about him when he published his actual novel, and I really wanted to read this, but I don't tend to gravitate toward poetry very often. I'm very glad that I did read this. I'm not going to tell you exactly what this is about because it's a poetry collection, but it really dives deep into identity and race and trauma that affects you from like your family's lineage down. It gets into the war in Vietnam, you know, his life. And a lot of the poems were very, very beautifully written and very intense. Some of them were a little hard to follow though, I'm not gonna lie. It was almost like I just didn't know what was going on, but that could be poetry too. I'm just not really into poetry as much as I used to be. I used to be really into it in my early 20s, but I don't really read it that much anymore. The thing that I liked a lot about his poetry was that it was more than just like 5 lines on a blank page, and it was long form prose in a lot of ways. It wasn't things that maybe you or I could relate to, but it was things that Ocean felt strong about and that he needed to get out. And that's what I really like to read in poetry. I don't really read poetry to feel, you know, relatable. I don't read poetry to feel like I'm being seen. That's just not what I personally like to read about in poetry. I like to read poetry that's by someone who has something that they can't help but get out and express in an art form like poetry. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Even if I couldn't relate to some of the poems or like any of them, some of the poems were just too difficult for me to grasp to like truly love it. But there were a lot in here that I could see myself going back through and like tabbing or wanting to reference again. He has a beautiful, beautiful voice when he's writing. So the last book that I read, I don't have a physical copy of, but I actually did read physically. I got it through my library, and that's Jade City by Fonda Lee. This is very much a Godfather story written in a fictional Hong Kong inspired city. It focuses on a magic system using jade, the mineral, and I thought that was probably the most interesting part of the entire story. I mean, I've read Mistborn that involves metal magic, but this just felt so different, like this using jade to make themselves stronger, faster, better. It was just really interesting in the way that it did that. But the thing that this book excels at more than anything that I've read in a really long time is how rich it is in its world building. This was some of the best world building that I've ever read. The entire country that Fonda Lee made in this story is 100% believable. The towns that she made, 100% believable. The culture that she wrote about, by the end, I was like, this is a real culture that I'm reading about. This is fantastic. It just felt so real and alive. World building can be the most difficult part of a novel, obviously, because you have to do it in ways that don't feel like you're basically putting an essay down on paper. Fonda Lee really found a way to merge teaching us all about the Kekonese culture while also pushing a plot forward, a very intricate plot, and I loved that. The story focuses on 4 main characters: Andon, Lan, Hilo, and Shay. I gotta say, Shay was my favorite character out of all of them. I think she was the one that I cared the most about, and she felt the realest, but all of those 4 characters are different and intricate and interesting in their own ways. The one that I really didn't care that much about, which I think is different from a lot of other readers, is I really didn't care for Hilo, and I actually kind of like that almost, because I think come the next book, he's gonna play a really big part in it that might make me dislike him even more. This book did what it set out to do. It is a Godfather story at the end of the day, but a much more interesting one, and I just really loved it. I can't wait to read the next one. I hope my library has it actually, because I'm not trying to buy any more books. But anyway, I gave Jade City 4 out of 5 stars. Ta-da! All right, that's it. That's all the books that I ended up reading in the month of August. It tallies up to 14 books. I actually read 18 in June and July, like 18 books in June, 18 books in July. So this was a little less than what I usually read. That's probably because I went back to work full time. I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully you stick around and watch some more. Maybe subscribe, comment, like, do anything that you would like to do. Bye!